Hi, my name is Linda Lacour Hobar, and I'm here with my friend today, Sarkis Kish, who's going to be sharing with us a very interesting and sobering story about the Armenian Genocide, which, to remind my students, was an event that was kind of embedded in and around events of World War I. So, Sarkis, thank you so much for being here. And please start by telling my students where Armenia is.
Armenia is a landlocked country. It's in the Caucasus. It's a north part of Iran, east of Turkey, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Armenia used to be part of the Soviet Union. There were 16 republics. When the Soviet Union broke up, 1991, Armenia was one of those countries that got its independence.
So it is an independent nation today.
Yes, it is an independent nation today.
Okay, if you would tell us now a little of the Christian history of Armenia.
Armenia became a Christian nation 301 AD. It was the first nation to recognize Christianity officially as a government.
So it became a Christian nation even before the Edict of Milan, which was in 313. That was under Constantine. So Armenia was not part of the Roman Empire at that time, right?
It could be part of the Roman Empire. So many different nations have conquered Armenia. The Persians, the Turks, the Arabs, the Seljuks, and the Romans, the Byzantines. So Armenia was geographically a very important place for them to control. And because Armenia became Christian, they were persecuted so many times by the Persians. So many wars has happened. So many Armenians have died. Somehow Armenians survived.
All right, now that we've established where Armenia is and some of its history, please tell us more about the political factors that were behind the scenes with the Armenian Genocide. Why did the Ottoman Turks suppress the Armenians?
Well, they want to depress most of the Christians, Armenian in particularly, and some of the Greeks. Armenians were prosperous merchants, and they also held high position in the government. And the Turk did not like that, and they say that, accuse Armenia that they're trying to be independent, so they want to get rid of them. And the main exodus of Armenians, the order came April 24, 1915. 2 million Armenians were expelled from their homeland into the Syrian desert. And in that process, most of them died from starvation and diseases. But prior to that, from 1894 to 1920, systematically, they killed most of the men. They want to get rid of all the men first. Among them were my grandfather and 4 of his brothers and all his workers. They were slaughtered, killed in 1909 in their own shop.
Okay, so your grandfather, Sarkis, whose name you bear, he was executed with his brothers, which is very tragic. Tell me a little bit more about your grandmother. My understanding is she was in great danger following the loss of her husband.
When all that happened, my grandfather was killed. I don't know what happened after that. They all were persecuting all the Armenians. and they're all running into their home and churches, trying to hide, and they burned the house. And anybody leaving the house, they spared the women and the children, but they shot all the men. And Bedros, Mary's brother, dressed up like a woman, and so they can spare his life. And from the way he was walking, they said that that's a man. And naturally, he dropped his Gulenia, my great aunt, and while all that fire was going on, and she was burned for all her legs, and part of her body was burned, but Bedros managed to flee. But Gulenia, somehow, somebody picked her up, and she was saved.
That story is so horrifying, but from what I understand of Mary's life, there was more for her to suffer. Tell us what happened to her second husband in 1913, just a couple years later. What did he endure?
Mary, my grandmother, she was a beautiful woman, and actually she lost her husband, and I don't know what year she got married, but he had a shop. Avedis, that's her second husband. He had a shop, and he was selling merchandise, and somehow the Turk got jealous, and they told the authorities that he's a spy. So they arrested him, and nobody knows where he was. They tortured him, confessed that you're a spy. Naturally, he was not a spy, but they tortured him enough that he was a brain dead. He was hemorrhaging from his head. And after they realized that he's going to die, they told Mary, come and get your husband. And that's the way he died.
Now, if I remember correctly, so after the death of Mary's second husband, Mary, along with 2 million other Armenians, that's when they were officially deported, and that date was April 24th, 1915. Tell us what you know about that event, and then we'll come back to Mary's personal story, but tell us more the broad story of that actual expulsion.
Well, the main expulsion was the Armenians lived within eastern part of Turkey, around Lake Van, western part of Mount Ararat. 2 million were expelled. I don't think Mary was part of that, but they put her in a carriage, and she was expelled to Aleppo with 4 of her children. 2 of them was from her first husband, and Uncle Zavin and Keruni, who was 2 years old at that time. This was from her second husband. They went to Aleppo, and in that process, the 2-year-old was abducted, and nobody knows what happened to him. So at that time, Uncle Zavin was 5 years old. My father, Vahan, was 8 years old, and somehow they survived it. And Uncle Bedros realized what's going on and took his sister and her children, and says, we're not going to get anywhere. They're going to kill us eventually. So they went to Syria and established in Syria and end up in Damascus. This is where I was born.
Let's go back over Mary's experience, because it's so touching. And she lost her first husband, who was your grandfather. He's killed by the Turks in 1909. And then her daughter was burned while they're escaping a home that's been set on fire by the Turks as they're trying to flush out Armenians. Then her second husband is tortured by the Turks to the extent that he's brain dead. And then when she does make it to a refugee camp in Syria, she loses her toddler there. This is more heartache than I think most people can imagine. I know she died later in childbirth, so you never got to meet her. Tell me what your father would say about her faith.
Well, what I hear, she was a great woman, and because of her faith, took her 4 children and kept the family together through all that tragedy. And of course, her sister Miriam was there. Bedros, her brother, was there. So somehow they made it because of their faith. If they didn't have their faith, they probably would have gone, fall apart.
So by the grace of God, tell us how you fit into the story. In that, I just want to go back to your father, and just so that my students know, it's your father who wrote this story called The Story of My Life, where he recorded and documented the things that your grandmother and grandfather suffered. So tell us a little bit about his life in Syria, how he succeeded.
So my father and the rest of the Armenians, no matter where they went, they worked hard and so many different jobs. So when they end up in Syria, later on, Uncle Margos, this is brother of Avedis, he convinced Mary to let him educate Zaven, and she didn't want Zaven to leave her, but they said that you're not going to get anywhere in Syria, might as well let him have it. He'll educate him, they'll become somebody. This is where she lost Uncle Zaven, and she lost her 2-year-old baby, and she was pregnant. All that tragedy, she could not bear, and she died at childbirth. And when Mary died, Miriam, her sister, raised those children. So Uncle Zaven went to a bunch of orphanages and ended up in New York when he was 17 years old, repairing rugs. He went to Greece, Germany, London, New York, and but my father have stayed in Syria, and this is where he established himself and eventually got married to my mother, and he was 28 years old. My mother was 14 years old, and it was an arranged marriage, and they got married when she turned 15 in Damascus, Syria. And I was born when she was 15. She became 16 a month later. She bared 9 children, raised 5.
Well, since you mentioned your mother, Annie, tell me a little bit more about her. She sounds delightful.
She was like my mother, my father. She raised us. My father used to come on weekends only. So during the week, she was everything. And we loved her. We felt very close to her and cried on her shoulder. And she was a great mother. My uncle described her. My mother never been educated, but is there such a thing as PhD in motherhood? She said, Annie, your mother, she'll have a PhD in motherhood. She raised us and made a man out of me, put that faith in me, that Christian faith, because my grandparents were the custodian of St. Sarkis Church in Damascus. This is where my mother grew up, have that Christian faith in her, and she put that faith in herself, and she raised us with a good faith. I am what I am, feel good about myself, and being an Armenian Christian, because I owe all that to my mother.
So I'm curious, tell me what it was like to grow up in Syria as an Armenian.
Well, when we were children, we lived in the Christian section of Damascus. Narrow streets, cobblestones, were mostly inhabited by Armenians and Arab Christians. And we were in the third grade, 1946. My uncle was going to come and visit us into Syria. My father felt that the house is not big enough, so we went and to the eastern part of Damascus, and this is mostly inhabited by Muslims. So from the third grade and up till I finished high school, most of my friends were Muslim out in the neighborhood where I grew up. But I always been active with the Armenian community. I was the captain of my basketball team. There were 3 Armenian basketball teams. There were like close to 100,000 Armenians in Damascus at that time. Of course, now it's a different story. So I got along with everybody. At the same time, that kept my faith.
All right, Sarkis, if you would now tell us about moving to the United States, how old you were, and why you chose to immigrate.
Uncle Zavin request, I came to Memphis. But before that, when I was 9 years old, 1946, when Uncle Zavin came, stopped my parents immigrating to Armenia. And Uncle Zavin hated communism. He didn't want us to go to Armenia. At that time, Armenia was part of the Soviet Union. Anyhow, that story always kept in my parents' mind. And I was 25 years old when I came here. Uncle Zavin sponsored me. I worked for him, and this is where we are. And later on, I brought 2 of my younger sisters, put them to college, and then later on, my other 2 sisters came eventually, and my parents came and joined us in Memphis in early 1974.
Well, Sarkis, I happen to know that you are married to a wonderful woman named Jenny and that you have grown children and grandchildren. I also attend church with your nephew. So I wanted to ask what it means for you as an Armenian to live in America.
Well, we don't have an Armenian church in Memphis. And when I was going to get married in 1967, we went to the Greek Orthodox Church. I've been a member since then. I've served so many times as a church council, and we always kept our faith. But the bottom line is, I'm so blessed. I'm getting emotional. I'm so blessed to be in this great country and to enjoy all the freedom and the challenges that it faces us. And to me, the cup is always half full. It's not half empty. I always look at the good side of life. I try not to complain about things. I meet things the way they come. I make the best out of life. And building up a lot of friends. And I'm sure you heard that I'm a tennis player,
Yes, I was just going to ask you about that.
and I'm going to be inducted in the Memphis Tennis Hall of Fame. So that's another thing that I'm proud of. But I'm more proud of my children, my grandchildren. We are a close family. We keep our faith. And to me, life is beautiful. And I'm so blessed to be enjoying life in this great country.
As is obvious, we are sitting in a beautiful carpet store which bears your name. So if you would tell us a little bit more about the family business, I'd love to hear it.
It started with Uncle Zavin. I worked for him in 1974 at age 62 or 63, somewhere around there. He wanted to retire. He sold the business to me on credit. I didn't have any money to pay him, but he knew that I could run it, I could be successful. So we were there on Park Avenue, and my son at that time was in college. He says, Dad, I love this business. I like to continue the family tradition. So that's where we are. I'm 82 years old. I'll be 83. I've retired, but my son runs the business.
Recently in the news, the United States House of Representatives voted to recognize the Armenian Genocide. The vote was 405 to 11. So please tell me what it means to you that the House passed that and recognized the genocide, and what it would mean to you if it was recognized worldwide.
I'm glad you asked that question because this is where my heart is. To this day, Turkey doesn't recognize the Armenian Genocide. They say it was a civil war and we located the Armenians somewhere else, but they never talk about brutally, barbarically killing so many, including my grandparents and my wife's grandparents. And I'm so thrilled to see that recognition from United States. This should have been 40, 50 years, 60 years ago. All the European countries acknowledge and accept that the genocide happened. But Turkey, to this day, they don't teach it in their schools, and most of the young Turk, they don't know that this happened. It's about time that United States acknowledges.
So Sarkis, tell us how we can pray for Armenia today and what some of the challenges are that they face.
Right now, we have a prime minister, Mr. Pashinyan, who is part of the people. I don't think the mafia has anything to do with running the country anymore. He is trying to bring industry to Armenia. Armenia is in the right path, and hopefully it will be prosperous one of these days. I've been to Armenia 2-3 times. I was in Armenia with Soviet Union. I was in Armenia later on. My son been to Armenia so many times. He even did volunteer work for several weeks and worked with the orphans and worked labor building up Armenian churches. So hopefully the future is good. As Armenia continues the way it's going, it's going to be good for it. Armenia had a war with Azerbaijan. 25,000 Armenians have died in Karabakh. And the Karabakh is part of Armenia right now, but I don't know what the future is going to hold. That's another tough question.
Well, speaking of tough I was next going to ask you about how we could pray for Syria. Of course, it's in a civil war, but you were raised there, born there. So tell us just the things you know about what ISIS is doing with Armenian history.
I was in Syria, my wife and I, after being 48 years here, 9 years ago. This is before the civil war started. And I was there, the country was prosperous, everything was okay. But it's a dictatorship, and as long as you don't get involved in politics, everything is fine. But what I hear, the civil war started, and during that time, Syria is 22 million people when I was there 9 years ago. 12 million have fled the country. There were 77,000 Armenians at that time, 10 years ago. 55,000, this is just only in Aleppo, 55,000 have fled Syria. Armenians fled Syria and went to Armenia, went to Europe, went to Lebanon, went to United States, and so on and so forth. And the civil war is not over yet. What I was saying earlier, I'm so grateful to be in this country, enjoying the life and prosperity that we built in this country. And I don't know what the future is going to hold. It doesn't look good. Going back to ISIS, when they infiltrated Syria, which they still do, there is cathedrals and churches in Deir Zor, and there are so many cathedrals in Aleppo. All those churches, all those cathedrals, they're all demolished by this war and by the ISIS. They blew up everything.
Monuments, didn't you say there was Armenian?
Monuments about the Armenian Genocide, all that is blown. So I feel sad what's going on in Syria. So a lot of people ask me, I was born in Syria, I'm a Syrian. I said, this is where I was born, but I'm Armenian Christian, and I'm proud of who I am, what I am, where I come from, where I am right now.
Well, Sarkis, it's time for us to wrap this up. If you wouldn't mind, in summary, what are the most important things you would like my students to know about the Armenian Genocide? What do you want them to remember?
Armenian Genocide, it's a historical fact. It's documented so many different countries. It happened. Overall, over 2 million Armenians have died from starvation, and most of the men were brutally killed and tortured and slaughtered barbarically, you name it. They burned churches, they burned home, killed everybody in it. So many Armenians have died, and so that's a fact. And I'm so thank the Lord for United States Congress to recognize the Armenian Genocide.
There is so much to your story, but in closing again, what would be some important things you'd want my students to know about being a legal immigrant in the United States? What are your final thoughts on living here now?
Because my uncle sponsored me, I got my green card with the help of a Jewish lawyer, and he helped me, and he says, one soldier less in Syria fighting Israel, I want you to be here in the United States. So I got my green card in 1967, and I became a citizen, in 1973, 5 years later. But my children were born, my son Sarko and Marianne was born, I wasn't even a United States citizen. Then later on, I became United States citizen. That was one of my proudest moments, when you swear allegiance of the United States of America, this country that is my country. I'm so proud, so happy to be in this great country. It's a privilege to be a United States citizen, enjoying life to the fullest in this beautiful country, which full of challenges, and a lot of youth that I meet complain about this, complain about that. They don't realize how beautiful this country is, because they have no way comparing this country to other countries. If they do that, then they realize how this country is great. Still the greatest country in the world, and I'm so proud to be part of it. God bless United States of America.
Thank you, Sarkis, so much for sharing your story. You are a delight to know, and I'm just grateful that you took time to share your story. It's a sobering story, but it's one that's so inspiring. I look at so much that your family has overcome, and I think about Mary and your mother Annie, and just sounds like faith and family made so much of a difference all along the way. So thank you for sharing that. I think there's life lessons for all of us about being positive, working hard, and so forth. So thank you for sharing your personal story. Friends, if you'd like to learn more about the Armenian Genocide, I do have a little bit of it in the Mystery of History Volume 4. It's contained inside the stories of World War I. Thank you for joining me. If you'd like to follow more of the Mystery of History, you can get my newsletter or blog. Just go to themysteryofhistory.com, where we will continue to bring you world history from a biblical worldview. Thanks again. Bye-bye.